So, Sonja, Dr. Lahnstein-Kandel, Manfred Lahnstein, and Frau Hoffmann, and ladies and gentlemen, actually I'm the one who's really touched and honored to be here. I'm really grateful that you invited me and to speak here in Haifa for this anniversary. We celebrated Zeitstiftung already in Hamburg, so we can do it now for the University of Haifa also. And I want to share with you my personal views. As you can see, with Germany's rocky path, we called it, to becoming immigration society. So just feel comfortable in your places. And I will just start with what Sonja just said about me, because I am the Bundestag's first vice president, and I was the first Muslim woman of Turkish origin in the cabinet also. And why I mention this is a journalist a few weeks ago just said to me, well, that's not really a big deal anymore. And indeed, I mean, after various waves of immigration in almost 80 years of Germany's post-war history, it really shouldn't be a big deal anymore. But perhaps it would be more accurate to say it's long overdue rather than the norm. For even now, I mean, it's 2022, I am still the first and only vice president with immigration background. The Hamburger Abendblatt, a newspaper in my home city of Hamburg, recently ran a report about your university and its anniversary, and it looked at the university's history and turned the spotlight on some of the key figures among the friends of the university, particularly, of course, Erich Warburg, the founder of the German Friends. As I'm sure you're aware, he fled Nazis in 1938 and went to the United States. Later, he and others from Hamburg began to support University of Haifa. And Sonja Lahnstein-Kandel is now the chairwoman of this board. So why is the university so special? The Friends describe it on their website. Jews, Druze, Ethiopian immigrants, and Arabs should come together to study alongside and ideally with each other. We heard some stories about it just an hour ago. 20% of the students are Arabs, more than any other university in Israel. The aim, as the Friends go on to explain, is to enable these young people to learn in an atmosphere of peaceful coexistence, tolerance, and mutual respect, how they can realize a shared vision for the 21st century by dismantling prejudices and building friendships. For me, these topics are very close to my heart. Like any democracy, German democracy can only succeed if its citizens have access to opportunities. This access to opportunities is so important for political and social participation on the basis of equal rights. And as a German of Turkish heritage, I know how important it is for people who have immigrated into a society to have opportunities to participate and make an active contribution if they are to feel truly at home. Legal and political equality is one of the key factors in making inter-community relations in a diverse society a success. In Germany, I was officially a foreign national at birth, and I'm still officially classed as a migrant, even though I myself have never immigrated. I'm the child of Turkish immigrants from Istanbul who moved to Germany 61 years ago, and just to build a new life for themselves. I was born and raised in Hamburg like many thousands of others in my own and subsequent generations. My mother tongue is Turkish, but German is my first language. We also spoke about languages. In the past, I called myself a Hamburg Turk because we didn't have German citizenship for children like me. When I was young, this was not an option that politicians would have considered. I had no right to vote, and of course, I could certainly not stand for election. At the age of 22, I applied for naturalization, and then it became quite complicated. First of all, I had to give up my Turkish citizenship before I could be issued with a German passport. Once I had acquired a German passport, I could then apply again for my Turkish passport to be reissued. Since then, and I made it, since then, I have held two passports, and that is fitting, of course, when someone is connected so closely to two cultures. This somewhat, let's say, creative application of rules ended in 2001 with the adoption of a new Nationality Act. It was preceded by a very hurtful and unpleasant debate in the German Bundestag. However, the red-green government prevailed. Since then, children of foreign nationals may, under certain conditions, acquire a German passport alongside their other passport at birth. So they have two passports at birth. The downside is that older people no longer qualify for naturalization unless they permanently surrender their original passport. Anyone who obtains another passport after naturalization automatically loses their German citizenship. So the very generation that came to work in Germany and as a rule worked extremely hard in coal mines and industry, often as cleaners, is not permitted to hold dual citizenship. For me, this symbolizes the inner conflict of a country that is attempting to face up to the fact that immigration is desirable in many areas, yet makes it very difficult for immigrants. When I and many others of the second generation was born in Hamburg, we of course knew nothing about our country. Of birth, we knew very little about the atrocities that are part of German history, and the topic was rarely spoken about at home because our own parents didn't really feel directly connected to the German history. It was a very different situation at school. For German school children, an intensive focus on National Socialist past is of course part of the education program to this day, always in the awareness that it mustn't happen again. On one occasion, when I was still at school, a visit to a concentration camp memorial site was arranged for my class. My teacher told me that I didn't have to come along. After all, it really had nothing to do with me. And as a child, to be honest, I found the prospect of a day off school quite appealing. But my mother was quite indignant. Of course you have to go. It's part of this country's history, and you need to know about it. So I went along, and this history, which is so difficult to comprehend, gradually started to become part of mine as well. Germany has been a country of immigration for decades. How else can one describe it? Many times throughout history, well-established communities and immigrants from the Huguenots in the 16th and 17th centuries to the rural Poles, as we called it, in the 19th century, and the Russians who fled the First World War have had to adapt to each other and find a way to coexist. Since the Second World War, Germany has experienced several waves of immigration which have imprinted themselves on and sometimes changed the country and society. This applies to the 12.5 million people from the Eastern Territories after the Second World War, the 2.5 million ethnic Germans from Russia, and some 220,000 Russian Jews after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Around 1 million Syrian civil war refugees in 2015, and now the Ukrainians fleeing Russia's war of aggression. The migration movement, which probably changed Germany and perhaps affected its self-perception to the greatest extent, was the arrival of the guest workers between 1955 and 1973, when foreign workers were recruited from the southern, eastern, and Mediterranean countries. For the sake of completeness, I should add that there were contract workers in the former GDR, German Democratic Republic, the eastern part as well. However, they remained almost completely isolated from the rest of the population. Today, the 6.8 million people with roots in the recruitment countries, the guest workers, 2.8 million of whom are of Turkish origin, form a significant and very visible population group. It should be noted, however, that Germany, unlike the classical countries of immigration, counts members of the third and even the fourth generation also as migrants, which does nothing to increase the sense of belonging, to say the least. Unfortunately, politics failed to keep pace with the development for too long. Until 1998, every federal government took the view that Germany was not an immigration country, even though all this happened at the same time. For decades, political leaders refused to take serious steps towards integrating the immigrants, given that millions of people who have a personal history of immigration, this attitude was absurd. It was only when the red-green federal government took office in 1998 that a paradigm shift occurred. This is really what we can say. Away from a defensive attitude towards immigration and unilateral demands that immigrants should make the effort to integrate, towards targeted promotions of immigration and the whole of society responsibility for relations between all communities. An important step in this process was the New Nationality Act, adapted in 2001, which I mentioned earlier. And at long last, in 2005, the new Immigration Act was passed, which stipulated that integration was the state's responsibility. The act was in some ways the first expression of commitment in the form of legislation by a federal government to its responsibility for integration policy. To back this up with a practical example, foreign nationals had been recruited to work in Germany since 1955, as I said before. For all those years, many had been criticized for not speaking German properly, or not having a job, whatever. But German language courses for immigrants were not officially introduced until this integration law that passed in 2005. So just imagine, 1955, and 50 years later, we had officially language courses. This is not a fast immigration policy, you can say. I was deeply moved to hear about the profound, and as Professor Lahnstein described last year, in many cases, traumatic disappointment of young Jews when in 1916, Berlin ordered a so-called Judenzählung, a census of Jewish soldiers to investigate rumors that Jewish men were attempting to avoid military service. Had these young German patriots, just like all other young men, not rushed eagerly in the battlefields in 1914? This deep disappointment in the German state often resonates in the speeches by Holocaust survivors were invited every year to address the German Bundestag on 27th of January. Some years ago, Inge Deutschkron, who passed away on 9th of March this year at the age of 99, recalled her father's outrage when he received a letter from the provincial schools board informing him that he was dismissed from the civil service for alleged unreliability. Her father had served as a volunteer in the armed forces in the First World War. Surely that was sufficient proof of his reliability. Many Jews, including some who had even been awarded the Iron Cross after the First World War, were dismissed from public service because they were Jews, not because they were guilty of any dereliction of duty. For far too long, German policymakers and large sections of the population were reluctant to accept that Germany was now our home and this naturally left its mark on us. Even now, there's a very emotional debate about the question, where are you from? A question which is likely to be answered with the name of a German city or place, rural district. This then prompts the following follow-up question, yes, but where are you really from? In fact, this question might be quite innocuous, but it's rarely perceived as such. As a rule, the people to whom the question is addressed were born and raised in Germany. And this constant probing into their roots brings back bad memories, as it was generally accompanied by exclusion, fewer rights, or even outright discrimination. There is some highly diverse opinion on this topic, which you can read in many newspapers and books already, articles in Germany. But to be honest, when my daughter was asked a few weeks ago exactly this question and answered somewhat, she was irritated in a way, that she's from Hamburg, and this guy asked again, but where are you really from? I was quite sad, because, I was born in Hamburg, her father was born in Dortmund. He's not Turkish origin, he doesn't have any other origin than German. So, just imagine, what should she tell? Okay, let me tell you my life story, like my grandparents came from Istanbul somewhere. This is weird. So I had a lot to think about when Professor Lahnstein reminded us in his Bucerius lecture last year that in Germany, there was traditionally a very widespread perception that the nation is not a community of values, but a community of descent, of origin. It was certainly no coincidence that there was such enduring opposition to the idea that the principle of descent should give way to the birthright principle, jus sanguinis and jus soli. In German nationality law, in fact, it proved impossible to reach agreement in the debate, and dual nationality, as I have mentioned before, was limited to persons under the age of 18, apparently in the hope that tempers would cool down, and one day, 2018, we can, solve this problem. However, this didn't happen. And so once again, we had to campaign vigorously about this, what we called options model, which required the person to decide in favor of one nationality at the age of 18. It possibly helped that some studies showed that compelling people to surrender from one nationality at the age of 18, effectively making them a foreigner in their own country with the loss of all rights, might be unconstitutional. What does it mean, this invisible distinction between those who are ethnically German and those who are not? A distinction which is still very present in some sections of German society. I found out for myself in a shocking turn of events during the 2017 election campaign. In several elections, the conservative campaign slogan referred to the concept of a German lead culture, Leitkultur. It seemed that many voters enjoyed the feeling of being ranked somewhat superior to others. However, I noticed that hardly anyone was able to explain what this lead culture, this Leitkultur, was all about. Or nobody dared to say, I don't know. So I wrote an article in which I described this notion of a Leitkultur as nonsense. Yes, that was provocative, was meant to be. And I expressed my view that German society should be understood not as a community of descent, of origin, but as a community of values. The regulatory framework for this, as I see it, is provided by our constitutional norms and the underlying system of values. My argument against those who advocated for this much vaunted German Leitkultur, with which immigrants were supposed to align themselves, was that simply on account of Germany's regional diversity, which, by the way, we're all proud of, this lead culture cannot possibly exist. I knew I might face some pushback with my ideas. In fact, that was what I wanted. What actually happened, though, was that the leading representative of a far-right nationalist party, the AfD, claimed that as a German Turk, I had no right to participate in this debate at all. In his own words, they should show me how German culture was, and then they would dispose of me in Anatolia. I was very grateful to one columnist who bothered to ask at that time what kind of German culture would be shown to me that would then enable them to be disposed of in Anatolia, that would enable me to be disposed of in Anatolia. The comments came as a shock, to be honest, and apparently not only to me. Wanting to dispose of someone like a piece of garbage, that was a serious lapse. From the reaction, it was clear that comments like this are not representative of the mainstream German society. While the public prosecutor's office in Thuringia took the view that the comments were acceptable in the election campaign, I met with a great wave of solidarity from the general public. Even so, these comments did not come out of nowhere. The sobering truth is that many people in Germany still generally view Islam as alien and often even as threatening. And many people still find it difficult to accept Muslims as Germans, whatever their immigration history. Right-wing extremists in Germany exploit this as much as possible in their propaganda. What is telling in this context is the endless debate about the question whether Islam is part of German identity. When the then federal president Christian Wulff expressed this conviction 12 years ago in his speech to mark the 20th anniversary of German unity, he immediately encountered vocal opposition. Even now, there is still a perception in Muslim circles that he was hounded from office solely for making this comment. I'm not quite sure about that, but this impression is reinforced by the fact that to this day, no evidence of any law breaking on his part has been produced. I ask myself whether people who say that Islam is not part of German identity actually mean, I don't want Muslims to be part of the society. However, because that directly targets people, they prefer to the somewhat nebulous statement that Islam doesn't belong in Germany. In politics, this can sometimes lead to bizarre contortions. Muslims are part of Germany, but Islam is not part of Germany, not part of German identity. So far, No one has been able to explain to me exactly what this means. After all, the religion is only there because the people are there who have this religion. So during my time as Minister of State in the Federal Chancellery, I also spoke with members of the armed forces with an immigration history. And they also revealed some bizarre details to me that the German public is generally not aware of. For example, when members of the armed forces are deployed abroad, the Bundeswehr normally arranges the funeral if they lose their lives. A female soldier with Moroccan roots told me that before being sent to Afghanistan, she was informed that she had to arrange everything herself since the Bundeswehr was unfamiliar with the practice in Islam. In this day and age, that is really nonsense. So since then, the situation also in the Bundeswehr has really improved. And by the way, we now also have a Jewish chaplain. But these are young steps still. So if I may, I would like to talk about another aspect of importance for good inter-community relations, and I'm talking about immigrants' trust in the state and its representatives. Specifically, the confident belief that they will be supported and protected in the event of attacks. The latest report on the protection of the Constitution puts the number of right-wing extremists in Germany at more than 34,000. 40% of them are classed as violence-oriented. And a month ago, it emerged that the number of politically motivated crimes reached an all-time high last year. The fact that the number of anti-Semitic crimes also rose by around 29% to 3,027 is a source of shame for our country. This undoubtedly includes attacks by Muslim perpetrators who express their hatred of Israel in this way, which is, of course, completely unacceptable. However, the number of right-wing extremist attacks on Jewish people is disproportionately high, and these attacks have increased dramatically in recent years. In total, 84% of anti-Semitic crimes can be attributed to right-wing extremists. And I'm telling you this because some individuals make quite deliberate and frequent attempts to play this down. Unfortunately, the idea that only Muslims pose a threat has gained traction also in some Jewish communities in Germany. At first, the constitutional watchdogs mainly focused in their attention on left-wing extremists and Islamists. However, after numerous attacks on refugee hostels in 2015 and 2016, when asylum seeker numbers were high, and after the horrifying events in Chemnitz and the attacks mainly against Muslims in Hanau and against the Jewish community in Halle, we were confronted with a painful realization that right-wing extremist violence and terror pose a real and much greater threat than previously assumed. I was profoundly impressed by the words of Dr. Charlotte Knobloch, former president of the Central Council of Jews in Germany, in her address to the German Bundestag last year. She said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I had lost my homeland. I fought for that lost homeland, and I was able to find it again. And I will defend it. I stand before you as a proud German, although everything seemed to preclude this, and many things still do." I have met Charlotte Knobloch. Nowadays, she has a large number of bodyguards to protect her, and to be honest, that really saddens me a lot. It shows that we still have a long way to go. There's no guarantee that the world will become a better place. as we clearly seeing at the present. Together, however, we can do something to make the world a better place. And for many immigrants in Germany, the National Socialist Underground, NSU, you probably have heard about it, murders were deeply shocking. It was bad enough that between 2000 and 2007, 3 neo-Nazis carried out at least 10 murders, 9 of them racially motivated, and also killed a female police officer. However, trust in the state was shattered above all because the authorities' investigations focused from the outset of the victims themselves and their families. For many, the greed of the loss of a father, husband, brother, or uncle was compounded by the dreadful experience of stigmatization. In the mainstream media and among the investigators, the crime were misleadingly dubbed the kebab murders or the Bosphorus serial murders, terms which can only be described as racist. The prevailing assumption, as a police officer later remarked, was that if a Turk is murdered, another Turk must be somewhere in the frame. He said that in the Deutsche Bundestag. But above all, there was almost no investigation into right-wing extremism. Instead, officers across Germany decided to pursue another line of inquiry, the wrong one. So finally, after the 3 terrorists were exposed, unexplained contacts came to light between various constitutional protection authorities and members of supporters or the terror group. The investigations themselves were beset by so many errors and omissions that the Bundestag finally set up a committee of inquiry to examine the NSU's activities and shed light on the German security agency's failure to prevent and solve these crimes. This has still not taken place to a satisfactory extent. Many files were destroyed or closed. As a result, for many citizens with a migration history, the hard-won trust in the German state was undermined and in many cases destroyed. In this context, I often think back to the time in the early 1990s when a shocking wave of hate erupted against people with a migration history, particularly those of Turkish origin. News programs reported soberly in tabular form on how people were being hunted in the street in various towns and cities. There were arson attacks on homes and even on people because they were of Turkish origin or refugees from Vietnam. At the time, I was accompanying a group of Jewish people from New York who had been invited to visit their former home city of Hamburg. The members of the group wanted to know whether I thought that persecution was starting again in Germany. What could I say? I was a student. I was quite young. On the one hand, there was such a terrible violence. People were dying in arson attacks. On the other, the perpetrators were a group of right-wing extremists, not the state. The state itself took a very long time to react in some cases. And I mean, just imagine for yourself, friends of mine taught their children how to climb down the fire escape in case the mob decided to attack their homes. So there was really nothing normal about this situation. It was extremely threatening. But it was also quite surreal to have to process these events in front of Jews from Hamburg who had lost members of their families in concentration camps or death camps and who had once been forced to flee Germany. We're following these events vigilantly and we are with you. One lady from New York told me, and it was so good to hear. It was real solidarity. I was very pleased that the Muslim community did not hesitate to show unconditional solidarity with their Jewish neighbors after the attacks on the synagogue in Halle, and the Jewish community reciprocated when there was an attack on an Islamic cultural center. Unfortunately, the importance of state support for this common ground is greatly underestimated in my view. And I'm coming to the end to give you a last example. A teacher in Hamburg called the rabbi one day because young people of Turkish or Arab origin had made anti-Semitic comments in class. Perhaps you might like to drop by. The rabbi said, okay, I will come, and he probably thought, what can I say to these young people? So he called an imam that he knew quite well and asked him to come with him. They both went into this classroom, and of course the young people were instantly less disruptive. Not only that, they were finally able to talk about these issues. To talk also about religion, maybe also to talk about Israel. I'm fairly sure this was the very first time many of these young people had ever spoken to a Jew. Above, which is for me even more important, they saw the genuine warmth in the interaction between the rabbi and the imam. For me, this is one of the core problems when it comes to intercommunity relations. We hear about so many problems, mainly from a distance. And of course, these topics often relate to Israel as well. But real-world encounter, real-world engagement is something that many people shy away from. And in my view, the outcome is that not enough is done to build awareness of the common ground and to show that friendship between Jews, Christians, Muslims are seen as quite normal in Germany. Muslims, particularly in Germany, are often asked if they recognize Israel's right to exist. I now understand, mainly from conversations with older Jews from Germany, how important it is to make clear that Israel's right to exist is part of Germany's raison d'être, and that we support it unreservedly. And at the same time, and there's no contradiction here, we would like to see fair and better coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. The article in the Hamburger Abendblatt, which I mentioned in the start, concludes with these two sentences. From Eric Warburg to Aydan Özoğuz, this too is a Hamburg journey. It has not ended yet. I was very touched to read these words, and I hope that they will inspire many future generations of immigrants to continue this journey together without discrimination or exclusion, but with respect for differences in background and faith, and an awareness of the common ground that unites us as humans. There are some hopeful developments. So in politics and society, let us make sure that they continue to flourish. Ultimately, as the great Jewish philosopher Emanuel Levinas said, only one thing counts, the face of the other. Thank you for listening.